When a New York Times host tried to corner Megyn Kelly with moral outrage over Donald Trump, it didn't go as planned. Instead of backpedaling, Kelly dismantled the premise, calmly, surgically, exposing how selective virtue has replaced honest journalism. This wasn't just a tense interview, it was a lesson in what happens when narrative meets intellect.
I just want to understand something clearly. Donald Trump was found liable for sexual abuse in a civil court. He's been accused by many women. You don't believe any of that?
I think the most serious thing I've heard about him has been the Megyn Kelly allegation that he sexually assaulted her in a Bergdorf dressing room, and I don't believe one word of that.
Her tone isn't defensive, it's declarative, grounded in skepticism toward what she calls narrative-driven allegations.
There are other women who have said...
I know, I've interviewed some of them. But look, the things I heard were included things like he got handsy on an airplane. Now, I don't know whether that happened or it didn't, but do I find that a deal breaker for a possible politician? Not really. At least I reported on their stories and did them the courtesy of bringing them to air in front of millions of people and let the audience make up its mind. My problem is more with these Democrats who will bury these allegations against their candidates or their candidate spouses and then play holier than thou when they're looking at Donald Trump. You have to understand, like, if you haven't sold your soul, you have to be willing to criticize the people, even that you admire, on your, quote, side. And my owning my bias by going out there on stage with Donald Trump and saying, I'm voting for him and you should too, is a bonus when it comes to my credibility. Now, everybody has zero doubt about where I stand, and they can filter everything I say through the appropriate lens. What typically happens in journalism is they say they have no bias, and then they just work it out in the printed word or on their shows without owning it. But the audience knows it, and it creates a distrust and a divide. When it comes to Trump and me, no, my own personal opinion is most of the allegations against him are much more complicated than the mainstream media would have you believe. And I don't think Donald Trump is a rapist or a sexual assaulter. I do think he's taken inappropriate liberties with women and gotten handsy with them in a way he's owned himself. Okay, years ago when he was a celebrity, and it is what it is. That's the past. But it's just about so much more than that. We are talking about how many people dying at the southern border because of the invasion that we've suffered under Joe Biden. We're talking about Laken Riley, whose killer was let in under Biden. We put him on a taxpayer flight down to Georgia where he murdered her. I don't give a about Trump getting handsy with somebody 20 years ago. I want someone who will close the border, which he has. I want someone who will keep boys out of my daughter's sports, which he has. I want someone who will stand up to the insane DEI policies so that white kids will stop hearing in school that they're born with some original sin from which they cannot recover.
She frames journalism as exposure, not enforcement, a direct challenge to what she calls the holier-than-thou press. Yes, Donald Trump was found civilly liable for sexual abuse and defamation against writer Megyn Kelly, not criminally guilty. The legal distinction matters. The jury's threshold was preponderance of evidence, not beyond reasonable doubt. Kelly's skepticism reflects that nuance and frustration with how outlets like CNN and The Times blurred that line in headlines. Her broader claim that mainstream media buries or soft pedals allegations against Democrats isn't baseless. For instance, The Intercept and Politico both reported how Tara Reade's accusation against Joe Biden was quietly deprioritized by major networks in 2020, while Trump's accusers dominated airtime. Kelly's critique isn't that Trump is innocent, it's that the moral lens is selectively applied. What makes this exchange fascinating isn't the politics, it's the epistemology. Two competing realities. The New York Times host views moral accountability as evidence of journalistic virtue. Kelly views transparency about bias as the only path to trust. That's the fault line of modern media. The legacy press still clings to the myth of objectivity, pretending neutrality while practicing moral framing. Kelly's approach, however blunt, acknowledges the age we actually live in, a post-neutral world where audiences demand honesty about allegiance. In that light, the host's anger wasn't just personal, it was institutional. She represents a system losing control of the narrative, and Kelly, by refusing to play along, forces that system to show its seams. There's a strange echo here of the 1976 Mike Wallace interviews, where the 60 Minutes co-founder admitted that bias, not neutrality, defines editorial framing, or of Dan Rather's 2004 collapse over forged Bush memos, another moment when institutional arrogance met the velocity of public skepticism. Kelly isn't inventing a new playbook, she's simply using old-school Socratic logic against a modern moral inquisition. So, when a host's moral trap collapses under its own weight, the real question isn't who won the argument, it's whether America still allows her journalists to question power, even when that power wears their own team's colors. Is that courage, or just the last flicker of free thought in a partisan age?